My husband had an accident. Nothing has been the same since. I woke to the sound of knocking at the door of the apartment I shared with my partner. It was a little late for visitors or neighbors to be coming by to borrow something, I mused. I slipped out of bed and exited the room. 1 minute, I called out, my voice still thick with sleep. I made my way to the front door where I was greeted by 2 grim-faced uniformed police officers. Mr. Watkins? The one to my right-hand side asked. Yes, may I help you? I asked. Are you married to A? He paused to check the notes on a small pad of paper. Terrence Watkins? He prodded further. I am. What is this about? I countered, already slightly defensive and on edge due to the circumstances. I wondered if my usually mild-mannered husband had gotten in trouble. We're sorry to inform you that your husband has been in an accident. The officer who had been silent stepped into the conversation. I felt as if someone had hit me in the chest with a sledgehammer. I couldn't breathe or make a sound, but silent tears streamed from my eyes. The first officer who had spoke up caught me when my knees buckled and they entered the house, helping me to a seat in the small living room. I managed to calm down enough to talk again. Is he alive? The question was shaky, but clear. He is alive. You don't seem to be in the condition to drive, so we can give you a ride to the hospital if you like, the quieter police officer said. I nodded my head and then hurried back into the bedroom where I quickly changed my clothes and put on socks and shoes. They escorted me to the cruiser and let me into the back seat. For a moment, I felt as if I were in trouble, that being the first time I had ever been in the back of a police car. When we arrived at the large building, they let me out, following me inside. One of the officers went and talked to the receptionist for me. The men in uniform stayed behind when I walked toward the elevator. The ride up to the intensive care unit seemed to take an hour. When the doors finally rolled open, I stepped out, finding my way to the appropriate room, and when I stepped through the open doorway, I froze. My husband was lying on his back with so many wires, hoses and tubes snaking away from his body in various directions that I failed to process what I was seeing for a moment. I moved to his bedside, and reached out, taking the hand of my partner. I don't know if you can hear me, but I am here, baby, I said. There was no response, not even a squeeze of my fingers. I had hoped that his situation wasn't as bad as it looked. My heart sank when the nurse and doctor entered the room and confirmed all of my worst fears. Terry was in a coma, completely brain dead. How long can we keep him on life support? I remember asking. A few months. There's always hope that he will wake up. The best thing to can do is to be here and talk to him when you can. Tonight, you need to go home and get some rest, the doctor informed me. The nurse even called me a cab, and I tried to sleep, but kept waking every few hours, convinced I had heard my phone ring. There were no notifications when I checked, however. I called my boss the next morning and informed him I wouldn't be in for at least a couple of days. Thankfully, he was sympathetic to my situation and told me to take as much time as I needed. I took a shower and shaved, making myself at least look like I had my shit together before I went to the hospital and sat with my husband. Both of our parents visited, and there was prayer and tears among them. I remember sitting in the chapel with them, but I couldn't bring myself to join the prayers. Days passed in similar fashion. When I was not at work, I was in that room with the man I loved. I was starting to lose hope after almost a month, and finally entered the chapel alone, and I sat in front of the altar, sobbing, finally breaking down in prayer. A few days came and went after that, and then one morning I stepped into the room to find Terry's eyes open. I freaked out, screaming for the doctor. The staff rushed in to see what had stirred me up, and I was quickly ushered out of the room. The doctor joined me in the hallway. Your husband is alert and responsive, but I have to caution you that he was unconscious for a long time, and we have seen cases where things like this can lead to wild personality shifts, he said, using a gentle, professional tone. I nodded, but wasn't really absorbing what the man had said. I was just happy that the other man was awake. Some of my joy was dampened by the fact that he was having trouble remembering words and names of common objects. I was grateful, however, that he seemed to remember me, holding my hand and squeezing it affectionately when it was offered. The initial few weeks after his awakening went by slowly while he learned to walk and eat again. The trouble started in the days after he came home. Terry couldn't sleep. I had similar problems in the hospital, but eventually they would give me something to help me, he confessed during a long conversation. That led to a protracted argument, and I went to bed angry. We didn't really speak for a few days, and one day, about 2 days after the fight, I came home to an empty apartment. I tried not to worry about it, though I looked for a note, and didn't find one. I wasn't surprised then, when Terry came home in the middle of the night. I was, however, startled to hear another voice. This one female. Are you sure that he won't wake up? The strange woman asked just as I had cracked the door. He sleeps harder than most humans. We will not be discovered, Terry replied. I considered bursting that bubble, but something told me to wait. I did open the door slightly wider, but the woman began to turn in my direction and I stopped doing everything, including breathing. After a half a minute I stepped backward. "We should go somewhere else." "I know somewhere," the woman said, loud enough for me to hear through the partially cracked door. They did leave shortly after that, and I considered following them but thought better of it. I cried myself back to sleep instead. I wondered if this was what the doctor had tried to warn me about the next morning as I shared a silent meal with the man I had married. I desperately tried to think of something to say, but couldn't. He made no effort to start a conversation either. I swallowed the urge to ask about his visitor the night before, and instead got ready to go to work. When I got home, the apartment was vacant again. My husband had left his clothing and other items, so I assumed he would be home late once again. I did wake when the door opened and closed, but didn't get up this time. Days like this turned to weeks. Eventually, my curiosity got the better of me. I turned on the location sharing on my lover's phone and I even left work early in order to get extra sleep. I heard Terrence enter the apartment with the strange woman again. They stayed only a short time, and this time when they left, I slipped from my bed and out the door behind them. I used my phone to track them, driving slowly until they stopped in the middle of nowhere. I sped up when I got past the traffic lights and stop signs, only slowing when the GPS prompted me to turn off of the pavement onto a narrow dirt lane. I stopped at the side of this small road as I got near my husband's location, and proceeded on foot, afraid of alerting him and his companion to my presence. I had suspected he was cheating on me, but when I rounded the corner, that no longer made sense. The only structure in the area was a large, old barn. I glanced around and saw Terry's car parked to a small minivan. I glanced around, but it didn't seem anyone was outside. I hurried toward the building, and as I did, noticed strange, flickering lights through the gaps under the doors. I could also hear people chanting inside. I crept to a small door to the left-hand side of the building, the barrier partially cracked, allowing me to peer inside. I didn't see Terry, but I could see the back of his new friend's head. It was bowed as if in prayer. I reached out and gently pried the door open a little further, poking my head inside to see a group of people standing in a circle, a candle at each of their feet. Terry was in the middle, his torso bare, skin smeared and marked with dark ash. He seemed to be leading the chants. I don't know if the cry I felt escaped or I simply gasped, but the woman, who was directly in front of me, spun in a rapid about-face maneuver. I bolted, sprinting back to my car. I went straight home, expecting them to follow behind me. They didn't. I didn't see the man I had married for 2 whole days. When he did return, neither of us mentioned the incident a few nights before. Honestly, I didn't even know if they investigated, or knew that I had seen them. I didn't really want to find out. A week later, he moved out, but still hasn't asked for a divorce. That's where we still stand at the moment. Separated. I haven't seen Terry in 2 months.